Hello and welcome again to Give and Take. This is the segment of our show where we look at fascinating and intriguing scientific discoveries and how they help us be more confident in the truth of Christianity so that we can go share it with others. Today I'm joined again by my good colleague and friend Fazale Rana, and we're going to investigate this question. Can evolution explain the origin of language? Fuzz, good to have you here once again.
Thank you, Jeff.
So this is something that doesn't seem so remarkable. I mean, lots of different animals communicate. I mean, dolphins, whales, all sorts of animals communicate with each other. What's so important about human communication?
Yeah, well, when human beings communicate through language, what we're doing is something fundamentally different than what animals are doing when they communicate. Animals are, in a sense, signaling to one another, and what they're signaling is really very limited to just a pre-described set of information or signals. But when
okay, so we're both communicating information or exchanging information, but you're claiming the nature of the information we exchange is going to be different.
Right.
Okay.
What we're doing is we're communicating open-ended information. So we're communicating using symbols. So we're representing the world with symbols. We're representing abstract ideas with symbols, and then we're combining and recombining those symbols in a variety of different ways to communicate information back and forth. Much of what we're communicating is actually abstract in nature. It's not about the brute reality of the world around us. It's really an interpretation of the world.
Okay, so the difference, trying to just kind of encapsulate that in an easy way to remember is that when animals are communicating, the dolphins, they're kind of signaling, hey, there's danger here, oh, I may like you, or oh, you're a friend, something like that. Whereas when humans are communicating, they're communicating a depth or things where you and I have to be able to interpret things beyond just the actual words that were being said or the signals that were being. Is that correct?
Yes, and what animals are communicating again is a set of information. Mm-hmm. It's a closed set, whereas what we're communicating as human beings is an open set. It's open-ended. That there's no constraints whatsoever on the information that we're communicating. So it's a fundamentally different mode of exchanging information.
So in essence, we could, if I draw an analogy there, is that there's a certain set of signals that an animal will use to communicate, and it's a finite set that communicates a finite set of ideas, but we're using, just take the English language, 26 letters, and there's virtually no limit to how you could combine those letters into more and more words that might mean something and multiple things. So is that what you're getting at with the open and closed nature of the communication?
Yeah, or another way to think about it is think about coming up to a stoplight. And there's red, green, or yellow, which means stop, slow down, or speed up, depending on where you live.
Right.
And green, which means to go. That's all the information that you can communicate with a stoplight. Okay. And that's what animal communication is like. Okay. All right. Whereas humans are communicating in a way like the signage that you would see on billboards, mm-hmm. where the information that's communicated through billboards or through signs is limitless. You're not constrained to just three modes of information. So that's the difference between what humans are doing and what animals are doing.
Okay, that makes more sense. So let's now dig in and explore, why is this a problem, or what sort of problems does this pose for evolutionary explanations?
Well, for evolution to explain the origin of language, you have to go from animal signaling to open-ended communication of information. And evolutionary biologists have tried to explain how that kind of evolutionary transformation would take place, and they simply can't do that. For example, a linguist by the name of Chris Knight, who's at the University College of London, basically points out that it's really interesting that language only seems to have emerged a single time, and that's with human beings. Mm-hmm. And so he argues the fact that you only see language emerging once means there must be some kind of impediment to the evolutionary origin of language. It must be very difficult to do. Now, he's viewing this, of course, in evolutionary mm-hmm. terms.
So this is something that actually points to human exceptionalism, if you will. Then our ability, how we communicate, really does make humans exceptional.
That's right. That's right. Because again, we're the only creatures that possess this quality called language, and you could think of language as essentially a manifestation of what we would call the image of God. And it's interesting that no matter how anthropologists and linguists try to explain the origin of language, they wind up in dead ends to the point where people have referred to the origin of language as Darwin's problem. We just don't know how language could emerge in evolutionary terms. And what's interesting is that when language appears, it appears suddenly, and it's uniquely associated with modern humans. No other creature seems to possess language, including Neanderthals.
So let's kind of take a look at that. It seems like from a materialist scientific perspective, if you will, where you're only considering the material of the world, this is a problem to explain. How does a Christian think about this? I mean, why does this fit better within a Christian worldview?
Well, again, I would see language as part and parcel of the image of God. It defines us as human beings. It's, I think, a manifestation of the image of God that we possess. And the fact that, first of all, it seems to be unique to humans, the fact that we can't seem to explain how it could emerge through evolutionary means, and the fact that it seems to show up suddenly, to me, has the hallmark or the fingerprint of a creation event. And so when Scripture describes human beings as being created in God's image uniquely, what would it look like if that was the case? Well, it would look like all of a sudden with human beings is this set of properties that separate us from other creatures. And this is what we're beginning to see when it comes to the origin of language.
I just find that fascinating, not surprising at this point, but fascinating that the way the Bible describes things matches what we're finding scientifically as we look in at some things that could be very different, but yet they line up with the way the Scripture describes them.
Yeah.
Fuzz, thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. Language is one of those things that really does distinguish us from all the other creatures. In fact, biblically speaking, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That language just seems inherent to who we are. It's part of our nature, and it reflects well that we're made in the image of God. And when we look at how does language arise from a natural scenario without invoking some sort of deity, a God, if you will, we find that evolution really has great problems explaining the origin of language. I would encourage you to go to reasons.org and look at Fuzz's blog, Can Evolution Explain the Origin of Language?, to get equipped to understand the conundrums from an evolutionary perspective, but how this discovery points to a God who loves us and created us and desires for us to know Him.